Okay, so today's lesson was supposed to be a brief review of what we've covered in life science so far, plus what we have in our folders. So let's start with the beginning of chapter 3, I don't know if that's the same chapter in your book, but we talked about classifying organisms, and we answered all these questions about why animals might look like this. We classified pasta instead of seashells. We answered these things. I thought the main idea was citrus trees share characteristics, and you could write 3 details that you found in this paragraph right here. When we got into why we classify, we highlighted definitions and important information, and then we went down to once again recap what was the main idea here and what were the details there. The main idea was about scientists using classification systems that make communication unified and easier and giving scientific names. We answered this together in class about we would use the scientific name of that crab. Then we went on to say how they go about classifying, and we highlighted the definition of kingdom, phylum, and species. We noticed the 4 main kingdoms here. Produce, we watched a really cool video on that. Fungi, that's sort of like my name. And then plants and animals. We discussed this classification tree here as well. We talked about the tool that scientists use, a dichotomous key, and we actually used some of them. Not only in this book, these animals were kind of simple. It was simple to figure out the names of these animals without using the dichotomous key. But we also did a little activity, once again, with pasta. We highlighted what the dichotomous key does tell you, the scientific name. Why might people long ago tried to classify living things? Of course, they would have wanted to teach their the people or their children like what was safe to eat, what was not safe to eat, maybe how to go about catching certain animals. And if we find an organism that has different characteristics, we would probably say it was a different species. Now, we talked a little bit about different characteristics of animals. Primarily, we broke them into 2 groups. Vertebrae, think about Mr. Fab with your book, and you could get all kinds of details and samples from here. And then we also had what an invertebrate was, those animals without backbones. There were some examples here, and I also posted a video that you could watch. If you were to do down here, calculating the speed of the snail, he would have crawled 2 centimeters in 15 minutes, and it would have taken an hour and a half for this moth to go 75 kilometers. This was a little bit more of a challenging dichotomous key because it wasn't as obvious as the color one from before. An animal has scales that's cold-blooded, but it lives in the water. Fish and amphibians kind of share this just a little, so I might want to know how they breathe. And once again, how do we classify animals? Because we have to look at their traits and characteristics. Now, we didn't really spend a lot of time on classifying plants, although we did get an opportunity to eat vascular tubes and to see the red dye go up there. So I'm going to just jump then to when we started chapter 4 in your books about how a predator could be a prey. And we talked about when the frog might have been eating the fly, he would have then been the predator. We went down to the land lab behind the school. Everybody had an enjoyable time. It was a nice warm day. If you're going to read this page about main ideas of wetlands, and it was just that there were many types of wetlands, and 3 details were there were swamps, marshes, and bogs. And then I added, because it seemed like they talked about not only lots of animals, but the kind of plant life that grew, marshes and grasses, and bogs and peat. when we read lesson 1 about the different parts of an ecosystem, most of you knew what biotic and abiotic were, maybe from 4th grade. We highlighted the definition of ecosystem and habitat, and once again we did main ideas and details. I'm not really sure that ecosystems being large and small is a detail that goes with parts, but that was already written in the book, and we talked about that. Then we talked about different types of ecosystems, and each one of them containing populations and what a population is and a community. If you answered this question over here about give me a population, I took the easy route and picked this particular population, but there were many different ones in here that you could have said, like a clownfish, like Nemo, and an anemone and a sponge. Then we went into different types of ecosystems in which you did your Google slide presentation. If you were total remote and didn't want to do that, I gave you a couple of ecosystem worksheets to look at. We just did, you've hopefully answered these questions around here. I picked where I'd like to go maybe as a rainforest someday. Hopefully you colored in the state of Ohio, and they asked you to compare the two different ecosystems of mixed forest and rainforest, seeing that they do have things that they share and things that are different. And then finally, we talked about a balance in an ecosystem, that a niche or niche, depending on who's saying it, is the role that the animal plays. And you could see that this might be a consumer, it's a hunter, this might be prey, he's also a consumer. I drew, I don't know if you can see this, think of a local ecosystem. I'm doing mixed forest and doing, this was my version of a squirrel. And then we have limiting factors over here. We highlighted the factors that limit how many animals can live in one area, which include how much food, water, space, and shelter. We actually talked about the deer in Mill Creek Park becoming overpopulated so that they allow limited hunting in that area. And we talked a little bit about space and maybe when your family comes over for the holidays, how that might affect your life. And then hopefully you have these questions answered. Now, I'm going to stop there, even though we've read in here a little bit, and I'll be able to do that later because I did want to talk about what you should have in your science folder. So I'm going to open that up, and let's start with what we kind of did to accent what we did in the book. And there's a dichotomous key for pasta. I gave you the letter for chapter 3, but there was the inquiry about how to classify pasta was on the back. You also received the chapter 3 lesson 1 review, and that's been graded and returned to you. And then we went into chapter 4. That says chapter 6, but about what words were important, we highlighted those. And then an ecosystem, habitat, and population, the review worksheet. Here's your vertebrae and invertebrate book that you did. Now, we had some limiting factors, activities on a computer on the PBS Plum Landing about making a mangrove ecosystem, and you turned that in. You don't have that in there yet because that was just turned into me before we went full remote. Then you have, I'm going to give you this hopefully when you come back, and this is your Google slide grade. And then hopefully you have your notes, which is what we highlighted. And we have up to 7 notes that we've taken since we started it. And then I've asked you to keep also that little plastic bag that has your vocab words in it that we cut out the cards in case you need that. So what I'd like you to do today is, this is just a brief review ecosystem paper where you're going to be filling in, this is the definition of a population, a definition of a community, how a food chain works. Right in here you could write the abiotic and biotic factors. Feel free to color this. Write your name up here so I know who it is, especially if you send it from another email, or attach it and send it to me. And that's it. So I'm going to post this on Monday, and I hope you have a nice day.